Let's take our Bibles, turn with me to Matthew, the 5th chapter. We're in the process of going through a series of messages that we have entitled Happiness God's Way. And we've been discussing how important happiness is, but how to attain that happiness by God's methodology, not the world's. The world has all kinds of ways for us to get happiness, and most of them, in the end, are empty pipe dreams. They just don't give satisfaction. But happiness God's way is real happiness, and the Lord is able to bring to our lives a happiness that can't be taken away. And today we're going to talk about happy are the hungry. Happy are the hungry. Matthew chapter 5, verse 6 says this: Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. They will be filled. Now, I rather doubt that most of us are able to truly appreciate the depth of this beatitude just to begin with from this standpoint. Most of us don't know what it means to be hungry or to be thirsty. We really don't have an understanding of what it means to be truly hungry or truly thirsty. For the original listeners to the Sermon on the Mount, those people knew what it was to be hungry. They knew what it was to be thirsty. Let me give you just a for instance of why I would say that. The average Jew in Jesus' day was only able to eat meat once a week. All right, no fast food restaurants to drive through and tank down a couple of burgers. No freezer packed with whatever comes to mind for dinner on that particular evening. These were folks that rarely, some perhaps never, saw meat to eat. In fact, now this is a rather interesting thing. You know, in our culture, the weight loss industry is a multi-billion-dollar industry. And I'm sure that some of you have, as a New Year's resolution that you've already given up on, the idea of losing those Thanksgiving and Christmas pounds that you put on. And you know, you see advertisements on TV and the newspaper and hear them on the radio. The whole idea of losing weight is a big industry in our culture. In Jesus' culture, in the first century, among the Jews, there just wasn't such a thing as people who were overweight. It just was such an unusual thing. To this degree, the Hebrew word for glory is the word kavod. It is also the word for fat. All right? And here's why. Because a person who was rich enough that they could be fat was a glorious person. And so if you could be fat in the first century, that was something you strived for, was to put on as many pounds as you could. Because the average person barely got enough to eat to maintain the weight that they had. In our text, Jesus says that we're to thirst after righteousness. Not just hunger, but thirst. We really don't know probably what it is to really be thirsty. You can go to almost any public place in the United States of America and you can find a drinking fountain. And generally it's cold water. And there's not a problem. You don't worry as to whether or not it's safe water to drink. In Jesus' culture, of course, there were no drinking fountains. Plumbing was a rare commodity. And it was not unusual for people in his day to have to go hours and hours without water to drink. And scavenging water was a difficult thing. And a lot of times, just out of necessity, they had to drink water that was less than clean. It was not the most sanitary conditions. And so people knew what it was to be thirsty. And so when Jesus says, all right, Now take that hunger that you relate to, take that thirst that you experience every day of your life, and now think about hungering and thirsting after righteousness. I want to understand the term righteousness here. Sometimes this term is translated as goodness, and we're going to treat this today as simply being kind of a generic expression for the things of God. Hunger and thirst after the things of God. Those good things that come only from a heavenly source. So Jesus in this Beatitude is saying, happy are those that hunger and thirst after the things of God. They're going to be satisfied. They will be filled. They'll be satisfied. Let's begin by talking about what hunger indicates. Spiritual hunger, like physical hunger, gives a couple of important indications to us. First of all, it is an indication of health. It is the sick person who has no appetite. Healthy people are hungry people. Hungry people generally are healthy people. And it is an indication of spiritual health when our soul is hungry for the things of God. To believe that you have had enough righteousness, that you don't need any more Bible study or prayer, that you're not interested in the things of the Lord, that's an indication that there's something wrong. You must realize that you need righteousness, but just the mental assent is not enough. Jesus says that he uses an expression that is more like craving, not just a simple passing interest in the things of God, but craving the things of God. When you crave the things of God, when you crave righteousness, that causes you to go looking for it, to seeking it out. Second thing that is indicated by hunger is that you have a realization of what really is important. You realize what needs you have as an individual. When I see a person who's hungering for the right things, that indicates that he or she realizes that there is a need in his or her life. Jesus does not present this righteousness, the things of God, as some mere option that we can opt for if we choose, or we don't have to opt for it if we don't choose. He sees this as a necessity. He likens it to eating and drinking, which of course sustain the physical body. And so the things of God are presented as absolute necessities, even as we would think of a man who's hungering and thirsting for food and drink. We all realize that you can't go without food and water for very long. Even when we go places, we think ahead and we make sure that we have water and that the food is taken care of. If you go camping, you make sure that you take a pack and you take certain provisions so that for whatever period you're going to be gone, your hunger and your thirst is addressed. In the same way, the person of God must see the things in his life, the things of God, as absolute necessities. It's not just, well, maybe I'll study the Bible, maybe I won't. Maybe I'm interested in prayer, maybe I'm not. Maybe it's a good thing to worship the Lord, maybe it's not. The person of God sees the things of God as needs in his life. He craves after them. And spiritually hungry people demonstrate that they know what's truly important, not only in this life, but what's important to provide for them in the next life. All right, my second point today is I just have some random thoughts about hunger. I was talking to someone last week, in fact, and they were talking about eating. And they said, I really don't care to eat that much. I've never been much into food. I would describe them as a person who eats to live. Then there are other people, like most of the rest of us, we live to eat. You know, the Lord did a great thing, didn't he, when he invented taste buds and good food. And you know what? Now, I've been told, and I don't know how you determine this. I've been told that a dog can't taste its food. Isn't that sad? Some of you are not believers. That's what I've been told, that a dog really does not have the taste bud system. What I want to know is what talking dog said, you know, dogs really can't taste. You shouldn't buy the expensive food, you should buy the cheap stuff. Have you ever noticed that even with dog food, when they advertise it, they want to make it look good like people food so that you buy it for your dog who doesn't care and can't taste? I've always been intrigued by that. But I have some random thoughts about just hunger in general. And of course, about spiritual hunger specifically. First of all, spiritual hunger must be acquired. And this is different from my normal hunger, all right? I do not have to teach my teenage son to be hungry. He is able to accomplish that very naturally, all right? In fact, we joke with Luke that he has a separate stomach just for ice cream. He has his normal stomach and he has his ice cream stomach, all right? I don't have to encourage him or try to develop in him hunger. It is something that is natural and normal for someone his age. Spiritual hunger, however, I believe must be acquired. And maybe it's not just hunger, but it's hunger for the right things. Proper eating habits are not something with which we're born. They are developed as we mature. Spiritually, this means that spiritually this is true as we mature in Christ. And a mature Christian has developed a taste for and ultimately a craving for the things of God. Our physical habits, our physical eating habits are the same way. You know, we have to make sure that as we get a little older and our metabolism changes, that we eat a balanced diet. You know, if you compare the things that you eat now with the things that you ate when you were younger, it's a whole different story, isn't it? You know, while we used to pass on all the greens and the broccoli and all that stuff that's good for us when we were younger, now as we grow older, we realize how important it is to consume the proper things. We learned that a man cannot live on fast food, junk food, and sweets alone. You know, just as much as we'd like for it to be that way, it isn't that way. And in the same way, we have to make a conscious effort to develop a longing for God's things in our life. And let me just say this. This is so indicative of our spiritual being versus our natural being. You know how to completely fail in the spiritual life? Do whatever comes naturally. I'm being serious. I'm being serious about that. If you want to be an abject, miserable failure in the Christian life, just do whatever comes naturally. Do whatever you feel like doing. Because the vast majority of what God calls us to do is not something that the natural man gravitates toward. You know, when it comes to things like repenting, when it comes to things like forgiving, when it comes to things like loving, specifically loving our enemies, these are not things that my natural man just jumps up and down and says, oh boy, what an opportunity for me to do whatever I want. No, in fact, a great deal of what the Word calls me to do, my natural man doesn't want to do. And so, frequently, the Bible describes what goes on within us as this conflict between the spiritual and the natural, the carnal fleshly man wrestling against the spiritual man. And certainly this is the case when it comes to our hunger and what we crave in our lives. Second random thought about hunger. Exposure helps. You know, it's one thing to say, well, it's about supper time, but it's another thing to walk in the house and supper's on the stove and you can just smell the air. You know, maybe it's your favorite meal cooking. And the aroma just fills the house. I love Indian food. How many of you love Indian food? Oh, I love a good batch of curry. In fact, I had some curry lamb the other day. It wasn't bad. I really did eat curry lamb. It's good. I love curry. You know what? Part of what I like about going to the Indian restaurant is you open that door and all of a sudden you smell all of that curry and ginger. I mean, it really stimulates your hunger. And you know, exposure to the things of God stimulates within us an increased appetite for the things of God. You will not become a spiritual giant if you only expose yourself to worldly things. Now, if you're only watching the TV and only listening to talk radio, and the only thing you ever expose yourself to is the world's music, and you read the world's magazines, etc., and that's all you ever do, you are not going to develop as a spiritual giant. You are not going to have a craving for spiritual things. If you desire to have the kind of hunger which Jesus speaks of, you need to constantly expose yourself to the Lord's Word, the Lord's people, and the Lord's things. Third random thought about hunger. Eating habits indicate maturity. Eating habits indicate maturity. Sometime ask a small child what they'd like to have and suggest that they can choose anything they want. Okay? In fact, here's an interesting thing to do with elementary age kids. Let them choose whatever they want to eat and tell them that whatever they choose, you'll feed to them for a week. Generally, it's something like cake and ice cream. How do you do? Oh boy, cake and ice cream. And the first day, that's lots of fun. Look at, we're eating cake and ice cream for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And the second day, it's like, well, it's not as good as it was the first day, but it's cake and ice cream, cake and ice cream. And the third day, by the third day, they're begging for a piece of bread and a glass of water. Children are not generally in touch with what's the best thing for them to consume. Popcorn, ice cream, potato chips, that's what children would choose to live on if they were given the opportunity to do so. Take a look at Hebrews chapter 5, verses 12 through 14. The writer of the book of Hebrews puts it this way. He says, in fact, though by this time you ought to be teachers, you need someone to teach you the elementary truths of God's Word all over again. You need milk, not solid food. Anyone who lives on milk, being still an infant, is not acquainted with teaching about righteousness. Same word that Jesus used. Solid food is for the mature, who by constant use have trained themselves to distinguish good from evil. See, as we grow and as we mature, we make choices about the things that we hunger for. And the Bible is very clear that adults choose to eat the right kinds of things spiritually. They crave the right things, and that's an indication of their maturity. Fourth random thought. Nothing else satisfies the person who's hungering and thirsting after righteousness than the things of God. Nothing else satisfies them. Think about it this way. Take a hungry man, a man who hasn't eaten for a week. Or a thirsty man, a man who hasn't had a drink of water, say, for 2 days. You can sit them down in front of the finest symphony orchestra and let them hear the greatest orchestra ever composed. Everything about the execution of that symphony can be perfect. It could be the most skilled musicians, the greatest conductor that ever lived, and it won't do a thing for their hunger or their thirst. In the same way, the things of this world will not satisfy the person, the man or woman of God, who craves the things of God. This is why Jesus says, blessed is the man who hungers and thirsts after righteousness. Other things can be given, but he won't be satisfied with anything less than the righteousness of God. He knows that nothing other than God's provision will fill his hunger and quench his thirst. Fifth random thought. Details are not important. Details are not important. The truly thirsty man does not refuse a cup of cold water because it's not served to him in crystal. He doesn't look at the glass and say, you know, I'm accustomed to drinking out of crystal, and unless you serve the glass to me in crystal, I really can't enjoy this cup of cold water. The hungry man does not sit down to a meal and then refuse to eat because the table service does not please him. And he doesn't sit down and start examining whether or not the escargot fork is in the right place. If he's truly hungry, he won't even care if there's chopsticks, a fork and knife, a spoon, or if he has to use his hands. He doesn't refuse the food in front of him because the tablecloth doesn't perfectly match the linen napkin that he's using. Now here's my point. In the same way, the man or woman that hungers and thirsts after righteousness doesn't get caught up in the details surrounding the opportunities to eat spiritually. The person who's truly hungry for the things of God doesn't go to a Bible study and say, well, you know, I studied that when I was back in Bible college. I don't think I can learn anything, so I'm really not interested. Or, you know, that Sunday school teacher has this one habit that really annoys me, so I'm not going. Or Ken, he didn't wear a tie today, and so I'm sorry, it ruined the whole experience for me. You know, the fact of the matter is the person who's truly hungry doesn't get all weirded out by the details along the way. The details become pretty insignificant to the hunger, the craving, the thirsting that's in place, because that thirsting needs to be fulfilled. Details are not important. Let's think for just a couple of moments about the threats that exist where spiritual appetite is concerned. I think there are a couple of threats that we need to be aware of. Things that stand as roadblocks to our hungering and thirsting after righteousness. The first is what I would just call sickness. And I have in mind here spiritual sickness. When a person says to you, I think I'm going to throw up. I'm really not hungry. We recognize that something's wrong. Right? And I had this experience several years back, and I didn't believe my son, who said he didn't feel well, and I wanted him to put his seatbelt on, and he kept taking it off, and I insisted that he put it on, and he kept taking it off, and finally he said, I don't think I feel good, Dad. I said, listen to me. I'm so tired of you taking your seatbelt on. You put your seatbelt on. Unless you are throwing up, you don't say another word to me. Well, about 2 minutes later, he proceeded to throw up and tell me that he really didn't feel too well. You know, when a person says, I'm sick, I don't think I can eat, that's a problem. Spiritual sickness, in the same way, will leave us with no spiritual appetite. And in fact, when someone says, you know, I really don't feel like eating, that's a good clue that something is wrong. And when, in a spiritual way, when a person says to me, you know, I'm just not into Bible study right now. You know, prayer just doesn't do it for me. You know, I got other things to do. I really don't have time to go to worship with my church family. All right? To me, what that says is there's a problem. There's some sort of sickness that is ruining the hunger. And it becomes a downward spiral. Not hungering after the right things is an indication that the person's not healthy, and instead something's seriously wrong. But if they don't eat spiritually, what happens? They become even weaker. And so the sickness becomes even worse. At some point, something has to change along the way to intercept the process. Sickness is a serious threat to spiritual appetite and indicates something must be wrong. You might ask yourself, right? You might say, well, in my life, how much time do I spend in God's book? What do I do when there are opportunities for me to learn from God's Word? Do I take them? Or am I just as content to pass on them? In fact, I had an interesting, just a short, brief conversation this past Wednesday night. We were doing small groups on Wednesday evening, and it just so happens that I am not one of the 4 teachers for the small group session. Someone said to me, and they meant it seriously, innocently, are you going to go to a small group? And I said, yeah. I mean, why wouldn't I? But I understand the thought process. The thought process is, hey, you're the preacher. I mean, you're the preacher. You have other things you can be doing instead of being in someone's small group. You'll do that, won't you? I've had quite a bit of Bible college. Had lots of opportunity to study the Scripture. But you know what? I have yet to find a Sunday school class or a sermon that I could expose myself to where I wasn't blessed to learn something or in some way be challenged. If you can say to yourself, you know what, I went to this class or that class, or I've been in church most of my life, blah, 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 and I don't have anything to learn, I would say to you there's a problem. Second threat to spiritual appetite is consuming the wrong thing. My youngest son is real good at this. Comes home in the afternoon, Dad, can I have a snack? If you just say yes, in my mind, a snack is, yes, you can eat a cup of yogurt. Okay? And he likes yogurt. So that works. Or, you can have some apple. To him, a snack is half a box of cheese crackers. Okay? Then it comes time to eat supper, and guess what doesn't happen? We're not eating supper because why? Because we tanked out on cheese nips, an hour and a half ago. You don't eat a bunch of junk food before supper because it will ruin your appetite. If you continually eat the wrong thing, you won't have an appetite for the right thing. If you pork out on what isn't good for you spiritually, guess what? It's going to destroy your hunger and your thirst for things that are spiritual. All right, let's shift gears, and I want to conclude today by just thinking about what results when we have this craving, this appetite for the things of God. I want to suggest to you that 2 things are most apparent. First of all is growth. The person who eats nurtures his health. He also nurtures his appetite. The more that we taste of the righteousness of God, the more that we desire of the righteousness of God. Hunger means growth and still more hunger. That's the way eating works. You don't eat and you don't want it anymore. You eat, makes you healthy, you grow, and it's like those kids of mine that were little kids at one time, and half a burger and 4 or 5 French fries did the trick. Now they're eating 2 and 3 hamburgers, and I feel like I had to visit Fort Knox for us to go out to pizza because they eat so much, But that's the way that it works with healthy individuals. As you eat, you grow. It stimulates your growth and your appetite, and pretty soon you're eating even more. That's the way it should be for us spiritually. If you look around and you find yourself envious of people who you see that hunger and thirst after righteousness like Jesus speaks about it, perhaps it's because those people have hungered and thirsted, and they have craved, and they went looking, and they ate, and they drank of the righteousness of God, and they've grown, and now they want more, and more, and more. I'll never forget one of the things that Seth Wilson said to me in Bible college. Brother Seth was my polemics and Hebrews teacher. He started Ozark Bible College back in the 1940s. And He told a story once about someone saying to him, and Seth was a brilliant man. I imagine Seth's forgotten. At my age, Seth had forgotten more about the Bible than I'll ever know. I mean, he was just a brilliant man. Someone came up to him once and said, "Brother Wilson, I'd give half my life to know the Bible like you did. And his response was, "That's pretty much what it's cost me." I'll never forget that. It's not like he got the God gene and the rest of us are in the shallow end of the gene pool. He invested his life. And that's the way it is when we hunger and thirst after righteousness. The second thing that results from such hunger is that we're filled. That's Jesus' promise in this text. The Lord's promise is they will be filled. We're satisfied. They will be satisfied. The hungry man goes to the satisfaction of filling himself with the things of God. His famished soul will be fed with things that bring him satisfaction. Not with emptiness that doesn't bring happiness. The person is blessed or happy because he or she will come to love and cherish the deep things of the Lord. Here's the bottom line, folks, as we bring this to a conclusion. How much do we really desire the Lord's things in our life? How much do we truly crave them? How much do we want them? And here's where I want to close. The promise of happiness in our text does not lie with those who attain righteousness. The promise of happiness lies with those who are seeking after it. See, it's not about a destination. It's about a journey. It's about a lifestyle. It's about being the kind of person that craves the things of God. And Jesus promises happiness not to those who attain some level of righteousness. He promises happiness to those of us who want to attain that and seek it our whole life.